my host family, they're really understanding, so they often like let me think my words out before I actually say it. And then, so from there, I'm able to practice more. And actually, the speaking tutoring session that I have with the flagship program, it's really helped me think of how I want to phrase my words. And
very confident with interacting with native speakers now. You know, a few years ago that wasn't the case, but the Language Flagship highly encourages interaction with native speakers and also requires it. So you may have cases where you're seeing tutors 3 or 4 times a week, and in each of those situations, you're conducting your entire tutoring session in the target language. And this is going to include small talk. This is going to include, you know, task-specific language. People are going to ask you questions and you need to respond. And I think in addition to fostering these skills, the flagship also finds ways to improve student confidence and allow students to interact with professionals in the community that may not even be associated with the flagship program at all.
I would say confident to a certain extent. Usually once they figure out that I can speak Chinese, and because I look Chinese, a lot of native speakers will start to speak at a native speed, which is probably one of my weaker suits when learning Chinese, is that I try and focus on every single word, and that usually slows down my ability to translate and then think of a correct response. But I definitely think that the classes that I took last semester, which was Chinese 485 and Music 478C, they definitely helped me as far as my listening abilities and then being able to respond more on the fly. But I think if I was put in China right now, I could survive, and then the confidence would just come with time. And I think that's with any language. You just have to practice it more on the daily in order to get better and to become more confident with yourself. And you can't be speaking with teachers, because teachers intimidate, because you know that they're kind of expecting things from you. So you have to be put in a casual setting where you're talking with people of your age, or just people who aren't expecting things from you. They just want to talk to you as a normal human being.
So I think the cultural divide comes up whenever you're learning a language. I mean, I learned Italian before I studied abroad in Italy. And just not being familiar with the culture, there's a lot of, implied examples that you usually don't get. And Chinese is even more so an example of that with all their chungyus and stuff. So I think there's just a lot of general, regular speech that a non-native Chinese speaker will not understand. And, certainly, especially with my Taiwanese tutor, there's a lot of those. And I just couldn't understand her accent either. So there was a divide. But I think that throughout my Chinese learning past, all of my teachers have been really thorough with making sure that they incorporate cultural understanding to the language as well. Especially with Chinese, I don't think that you can learn it without the historical background. So it's always been like a mesh of that education, and I think that's super important. Interacting with native speakers is becoming more and more comfortable, I suppose. Although I think always when you initially meet someone, there's a new level of maybe frustration in your inability to express yourself adequately, or just maybe nervousness. But after some time, that goes away. As with most of my tutors at this point, I'm pretty comfortable with them. But I did have one tutor who was a native Taiwanese speaker, and we just struggled a lot to communicate effectively. So, I mean, those are important struggles to go through when you're learning it, especially with Chinese, given all the different dialects. Interacting with different dialects is important. If I'm going to live in China, I'm going to interact with those people all the time of various backgrounds. I think I'm nervous about being in China, interacting with maybe people who are less familiar with English or American culture, because I can always fall back on English right now. So, I'm still nervous about that, but it's going to be like a good learning curve, I suppose, for me.